I'm Linda Akibe, and you are welcome to the Gavel. Now we are counting down days to the 2023 general elections, and we're seeing the final days of the campaigns by political parties. Now, during the week, the Senate Committee and House of Representatives Committee on INEC organized a public hearing to examine the level or extent of implementation of the 2022 Electoral Act. Now, those in attendance at the public hearing included representatives of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, as well as government officials and members of several civil society organizations. At the hearing, the CSOs made observations about INEC's preparedness for the elections, as well as concerns about the just concluded collection of permanent voters' cards. Now, Electoral umpire INEC presented its position on its schedule, saying no adjustment will be made for the schedule for the collection of permanent voters' cards.
Document from your officer.
Yes, federal lawmakers from the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting with officials of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to ascertain the extent of the implementation of a new electoral law. It's been almost a year since President Muhammadu Buhari signed the 2022 electoral bill into law. And since then, off-season elections, including 2 governorship elections, have been conducted using the new law. The Senate and House of Representatives committees on INEC are organizing this public hearing as the 2023 general election approaches.
You will agree with me that this is a turning point for our nation. A time to test our democracy through a seamless and peaceful democratic transition. As legislators, and with the support of the leadership of the National Assembly and the present government, we have played our part with the passage of Electoral Act 2022. The Independent National Electoral Commission has been given the required legal framework to successfully carry out this all-important document or democratic exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, let me seize this opportunity to appreciate the efforts of INEC efforts that have shown that you are conscious of the enormous task ahead of you and the expectations of Nigerians as it relates to the coming election. But we are hopeful that with the collaboration between INEC and the security agencies, election will be held in the areas concerned. Some captains of relevant security agencies are also represented in this special hearing to brief the committee on their efforts to have a successful exercise come 2025 February and March 11 this year. The leadership of the National Assembly, distinguished colleagues, permanent partners, invited guests, representatives of political parties, civil society organizations, development partners, members of diplomatic corps, and international organizations.
Civil society organizations, international observers, and representatives of political parties make their observations and recommendations to the electoral umpire.
We are all solidly behind INEC as it prepares to hold a very crucial general elections for Nigeria. There are still a lot of issues, there are still a lot of questions, but civil society is strongly in support of INEC as it prepares to hold the elections. The chairman of the Senate Committee on INEC, Senator Gaya, and the chair in the House, Senator Honorable Duku, and indeed all of the members of both committees in the Senate and House did extensive work to ensure the passage of Electoral Act 2022 in both chambers. And this was assented to by the President, and I'm happy that Senator Omowari is here and did work to ensure that the President assented to the bill. Now we're at the stage of seeing the bill being implemented. Of course, we're worried about a couple of things, especially the judiciary. That's always a constant question, and it's worrying to all of us to be able to ensure that the judiciary understands that the spirit and intention of the Electoral Act is to deal with several of the challenges that we have seen with implementation of previous electoral acts. And our hope is that the judiciary understands the intent of the Electoral Act and cues in to ensure that its success is achieved. But we do certainly are prepared as citizens, as civil society organizations, observing every stage of the process, observing the elections, which we are looking towards happening, or the first one on February 25th of this year. And the hope we all have is that elections will hold as scheduled. The situation in the country is challenging for all of us. But what will help to reduce the tension and challenge that the country is faced with is the holding of the elections as scheduled. We would like to emphasize that because it is important for this country that we are able to deal with the crisis. We know that those who are in power today have tried their best. We want to be able to ensure that there's an election that holds, that brings in new leadership for the country, and that the country begins to prepare to deal with the serious challenges that we are faced with. I think that any derailment of that could portend even more crisis. So we're all hoping and working and supporting the Electoral Commission to ensure that elections hold on February 25th. And we know that the legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives have a key role to ensure that a key bill that they passed, perhaps one of the most important landmark bills passed by the National Assembly, the 9th Assembly.
We need the judiciary to stand up, to be independent, and there's quite often a lot of pressure on the judiciary, so that matters. Secondly, the security, and I think there's been huge progress in independence of the various security bodies, but we really need the IGP to step out now very publicly to declare that independence, so that's something we'll be watching very closely. And of course, we're in a very tense situation with the fuel crisis and now this Naira crisis. There's a real practical implication on logistics for this. So, for example, we want to have 7 teams observing the election. If we can't access Naira, we're not going to be able to put people on the ground. So the embassies have put in a note verbal to the Foreign Ministry saying, you know, we're not actually able to function to do our jobs and play our part in observing and so on. But of course, we're only a small part of this. You know, if INEC officials can't get on the ground, if political parties can't get their observers on the ground because of shortage of Naira, there's a risk of a delay. And a delay, as Clement says, is going to have, I think, really serious ramifications. So the two issues are linked. There's the delay linked to practical challenges, and we have to do everything we can, all of us in this room, to try and ensure the elections can take place on time.
I also seriously think that the Electoral Act has some lacunae that has been exploited by the judiciary. We are all aware that even though the portal for electoral processes have been closed, courts are still giving conflicting judgments regarding candidates in this election, including some candidates that did not even participate in primaries that have been imposed on INEC as we speak. One of them is your president here. An electoral act that also empowers INEC to become a major decision maker for parties is not a democratic electoral act. I also want to say that the Senate should look directly into how to curb INEC power to deregister parties, because that does not promote democracy at all.
A representative of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, responds.
With the general election at hand, it is important to remind you all of the Commission's commitment to free, fair and credible elections. Our preparation is, however, fraught with challenges. There is no doubt that violence and threat of violence are major challenges to credible election in 2023. Violence makes deployment for election difficult, particularly where some of the attacks are targeted at INEC's facilities, the electoral process and participants. However, the Commission has been working with security agencies and other stakeholders to establish mechanisms to understand, track, and mitigate security challenges. We are working collaboratively in the context of Inter-Agency Consultative Committee on Electoral Security (ICSES). In all, we feel assured by the actions we have taken and our collaboration with the security agencies. The 2023 general election will proceed as planned. there is no plan whatsoever to postpone the election. Towards the 2023 general election, the Commission has been joined in over 1,000 pre-election cases as at Friday, 6 January 2023, involving inter-party elections and nominations of candidates by political parties.
While INEC assures of its readiness to conduct free, fair and credible elections, civil society organizations fear that voter apathy and disenfranchisement could be recorded because of the difficulties experienced by registered voters in collecting their permanent voters' cards. The National Assembly election will be taking place on the same day as the presidential election on February 25th. However, a coalition of non-governmental actors are worried that there is not sufficient attention given to the National Assembly elections.
The African Parliament Advocacy and Reform Group is lamenting what it describes as low interest in the 2023 National Assembly elections. Speaking at a press conference in Abuja, the lead partner of the group, Mr. Chubuzo Kiriki, says whereas media platforms are saturated with the presidential campaign rallies and media engagement with presidential candidates, little or no attention has been channeled towards the electoral campaigns for the National Assembly elections. The group is therefore calling on the media and all relevant stakeholders to use the remaining 15 days campaign window to focus attention on National Assembly elections to highlight the important fact that no president in a constitutional democracy can successfully implement its policy agenda without the presence of a functional National Assembly.
The outlook of the 2023 National Assembly elections, according to INEC reports, shows that about 1,101 candidates are vying for the 109 Senate seats, while 3,122 candidates are vying for the 360 seats of the House of Representatives. The record highlights the degree of competitiveness of the National Assembly elections in Nigeria, with an average of 9 candidates to 1 seat, representing about 50% of the total number of candidates expected on the ballot per seat. Similarly, the 2023 National Assembly elections, like the presidential election, will be held amidst growing insecurity concerns, economic hardships arising from the currency swap policy of government, high inflation, humongous national debt burden, and towering youth unemployment. But more importantly, the elections will be held under the new BVAS and IREF technology and Electoral Act regime. Also, according to the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies report, the National Assembly elections continues with worrying levels of high legislative turnover of about 80% from the outcomes of the party's primaries. These multidimensional challenges have significant potential to escalate the already characteristic low voter turnout and other incidental associated implications with legislative election and operation of legislature in Nigeria.
We've seen a lot of media interrogations, media interviews, all the media organizations and even citizens inviting the candidates of different political parties running for their presidency, interviewing them, drilling them, organizing different types of debates. But hardly have you seen any National Assembly aspiring members being invited on any platform to even discuss what knowledge do they have, why should people vote for them, what is their agenda in aspiring to be either a senator or House of Representative members. This also goes down to the state assemblies. Nobody knows them. Mostly, you even go around the communities and then you ask them who is the senator representing your constituent. Most people don't even know. And this is bad for democracy.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. Now, the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, has filed a lawsuit against Senate President Ahmad Lawan and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, over their failure to cut the sum of 283.1 billion naira from the National Assembly budget. Now, the National Assembly increased its 2023 budget from 169 billion proposed by President Buhari to 221.1 billion. Now, Sarah believes the increase in the National Assembly's budget is inappropriate considering the country's huge budget deficit. We interviewed the Deputy Director, Serap, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, on this matter.
The suit is predicated on our advocacy to the National Assembly to ensure that they reduce their budget. And that is in the interest of democracy, transparency and accountability, and the greater fight against corruption. We find that the increase of the budget of the National Assembly, particularly self-inflicted, as it were, to 228 billion naira, does not reflect the economic reality that we see in Nigeria. And that is the economic reality that are faced by more than 200 million people. And the members of the National Assembly, they are less than 500. And so there is no justiciability, there is no legal basis, no moral basis, no economic basis whatsoever for the increase of the budget of the National Assembly from 169 billion, which is still too large, to 228 billion. So we are written to the National Assembly through the Senate President and the Speaker of the House of Representatives to ensure that they reduce that budget in the interest of Nigerians. Having in mind that the bulk of this budget, over 10 trillion, is going to be funded by loans. And when that advocacy overture fails, naturally, as law-abiding citizens, we approach the court. For the court ultimately to determine the rights and obligations of Nigerians in this instance, not Sarah, against those of the members of the National Assembly.
And so since you filed the suit, has there been any response from the National Assembly, either the Senate or the House of Representatives?
The initial correspondence that we sent to the National Assembly, we did not get a response. And so since the suit has been filed, naturally what will happen is that the lawyers of the National Assembly will join issues with us in court. We have not received any process of the National Assembly as part of this judicial process. And we've not seen the desired change either. It is very important to understand that one of the prayers that our lawyers are asking for in this suit is also to restrain the National Assembly from accessing or demanding for getting these funds, and also from the Ministry of Finance to release these funds to the National Assembly until the court determines whether the increase itself or the allocation of 228 billion naira is legal.
In the press statement which Sarah issued initially on this matter, you said that the increase of the National Assembly's budget was unlawful. And why the use of that word unlawful? Or why do you think the increase is unlawful?
It is unlawful because the increase itself, it breaches fundamental provisions of our laws. The key among them be the constitutional provisions and the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. You would recall the members of the National Assembly, having taken an oath of office, which is constitutional in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, have sworn to always act in the best interest of Nigerians, and that self-interest will not be paramount in their affairs in the conduct of their lawmaking responsibility. And in this instance, it is clear that allocating 228 billion to less than 500 people at the expense of over 200 million Nigerians can only be said to be in self-interest, particularly given the fact that the initial budget laid before the National Assembly is just 169 billion, which is still too high, by the way. And then they increased that by 59.1 billion. That is huge, and it does not reflect the economic realities of Nigeria. And again, when you look at the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, Section 48 is very clear as to the powers, the responsibilities of the National Assembly, that is to be transparent, to be accountable to the Nigerian people for these statutory duties. Clearly, these allocations, these huge funds, cannot be said to be in the interest of Nigerians. And when you look at these vis-a-vis the other provisions in the 2023 Appropriation Act, you would understand this. For instance, the allocations by statutory transfers to UBEC, and that is by Section 11 of the UBEC Act, have clearly stated that not less than 1% of the considered revenue fund will be allocated to the basic education fund. And it's very important to understand the wording of it. It says not less than 1%. And what that means in simple interpretation is it could be more than 1%. And so with more than 20 million Nigerian out-of-school children, do you think the government should allocate the 1% minimum? In this instance, just 103 billion naira. Yes, the National Assembly gets over 2 billion naira. Does that show that we are a government that prioritizes education, that understands the imperative of education? Knowing fully well that the Constitution and even the UBIC Act mandates the first primary school education and the first 3 years of secondary education are compulsory. So these acts stands against the provisions of the Constitution in this regard. And the same is replicated too in the National Health Act. Again, in the 2023 Appropriation Act, what we've seen, it's just a paltry sum of less than 59 billion naira was allocated. Yet the National Assembly gets over 200 billion naira. Really, it will be very hard to justify these allocations, particularly when the breakdowns and the line items are not that clear. They are not made available to Nigerians. What we've seen are just basics. And so we saw the National Assembly say, for instance, that part of that over 200 billion naira, we have 30 billion naira as severance package for outgoing members and the cost of inauguration. So the natural question that you would ask is, how many members are leaving? How many of them are coming back? And what is the breakdown of this cost? And is there any law that provides for severance payments to lawmakers? There is no law that provides for that kind of allocation. Yet, at the expense of critical sectors of the Nigerian economy, these members of the National Assembly are allocated huge sums of money to themselves. And against the backdrop of growing poverty, backed up by data, the NBS has said more than 130 million Nigerians are poor. Shouldn't government prioritize spending to make sure that people really come out of poverty?
You know, there's been this drive or this call for some time now for an openness. And you have spoken about the budget of the National Assembly, it not being completely open. Is this something that you're still worried about? In the breakdown you have seen of the National Assembly, are you satisfied with the way they have broken down the spendings, the line items of their budget?
Of course, we are not satisfied. It is not enough. I bulk, particularly the budget of the National Assembly by statutory transfer, and it's on the first line charge. It is not enough. With the practice that we've seen constitutionally is that the executive prepares the appropriation bill, which includes a breakdown of each line stating what is capital expenditure, what is recurrent. But what we've seen in the National Assembly over time is that they have bulk figures which form the statutory transfer, and rarely have we seen any breakdown of line items of these funds. So we do not even know what in exact sense what is capital, what is recurrent. And that also goes to the issue of what each senator earns. We do not know. So even the severance package is we do not know what the take home of each senator is. Naturally, we do not know what will form the bulk of that severance package, which I still maintain is unlawful. So the budget of the National Assembly, as it stands in the processes itself, is of course not open. And the talk of the percentage itself is still unlawful. So it's a much more bigger problem.
Now, there's been this, worry or concern, raised by some Nigerians. The National Assembly oversights the executive, the judiciary, other arms of government. Who oversights the National Assembly?
That's a very good question. And that doesn't mean that we need to have an agency, as it were, that will monitor, that will hold the National Assembly accountable. We will only end up proliferating agencies. But there are constitutional provisions that also make the National Assembly responsible, which is that the process of appropriation itself. Understand clearly that it is the executive that presents the bill to the National Assembly. But what we've seen is that the National Assembly finds a way to make up its own budget without any kind of oversight, so to speak. And so this act of increase from 169 billion to 228 billion clearly shows that lack of control, as it were, and the indiscipline and the reckless use of powers of the National Assembly to increase and allocate funds for itself as against the interest of the majority of Nigerians who are poor. It's really very insensitive, and we really hope the court will agree with Nigerians in this instance.
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us, and see you again next week.